The call came in at 2:27 in the morning on a cold November morning. The Pine Grove subdivision, usually wrapped in suburban silence at that hour, it was filled with the wailing of police sirens. As red and blue lights painted the modest houses with an unsettling glow, neighbors emerged from behind curtains to witness the unthinkable. A body being taken out of 1542 Maple Street, the home of Emma Davis, 24 years old. But to understand how this quiet neighborhood turned into a crime scene, we must turn back the pages to where this story truly begins. Emma Davis was not always Pete's young widow. Only 2 years earlier, she was Emma Reynolds, a newlywed with bright eyes and dreams as modest and wholesome as the subdivision she called home. Emma's story was one of simple aspirations, a local girl who did everything right. She attended a community college while working part-time, and married her high school sweetheart, David, and secured a sensible career as an accountant. They bought the small house on Maple Street with stars in their eyes and plans for improvements in hand. David's job in construction meant they could gradually transform it into their dream home, project by DIY project. Their love story was the kind that Pine Grove celebrated, young and free, young, Christian, hard-working. Then came September 12, 2023. A normal Tuesday turned devastating when David fell from 4 stories at his construction site. Emma became a widow before she had finished paying for her wedding dress. At 24, she found herself overwhelmed by adult responsibilities for which she had never been prepared. A mortgage that stretched her starting accountant's salary to the limit, medical bills from David's brief hospital stay, and funeral costs that consumed her modest savings. The neighborhood rallied around her, as Pine Grove always did in times of crisis. Casseroles appeared at her door, condolence cards filled her mailbox, and prayers were offered at the First Baptist Church. But casseroles couldn't fill the empty side of her bed, and prayers couldn't pay the mounting bills that kept her awake at night. 3 houses away from Emma's increasingly neglected lawn lived the Millers. Robert Miller, 58 years old, was so young. Everything Pine Grove respected, plant manager at the local factory, deacon at the First Baptist Church, father of 2 college students, and husband of Patricia for 25 years. From the outside, the Millers' 2-story colonial house represented suburban success. The meticulously maintained lawn, the freshly painted shutters, the flower beds without weeds, but behind the polished exterior, cracks were forming. Patricia Miller's smile had become strained as empty nest syndrome took its toll. The tuition fees for their 2 children stretched the family finances, forcing Robert to refinance his nearly paid-off mortgage. At work, younger managers were being promoted while Robert remained stuck in middle management. His morning runs grew longer, his returns home at night more delayed. The mirror reflected a man fighting against time. Graying hair at the temples, reading glasses now permanent, a waist expanding despite his best efforts. The Pine Grove subdivision was the perfect setting for this impending tragedy. A place where appearance mattered more than reality. Where neighbors spied on each other through Venetian blinds while smiling and waving from their driveways. The community prided itself on its family values, active religious life, and well-maintained properties. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, or at least they thought they did. The young widow and the middle-aged family man might never have connected if it weren't for a broken garage door one October morning. And above, struggling with the manual opening after the electronic system failure, caught Robert's attention as he set out on his morning run. It was the kind of neighborly interaction that Pine Grove encouraged, the established resident helping the young widow in distress, the respectable family man offering assistance to a member of his church. Standing in her driveway that morning, neither Emma nor Robert could have imagined how this simple interaction would turn into an obsession that would leave one of them dead and the other facing murder charges. But as the autumn leaves began to fall, the seeds of attraction had already taken root, nourished by loneliness, despair, and the stifling expectations of a community that valued appearances more than reality. As the neighborhood settled into its nightly routine on that fateful October night, nobody noticed Robert's lingering gaze toward Emma's kitchen window, nor Emma's slight pause as she picked up her mail, while Robert worked in his garden. In a community built on traditional values and Christian morals, the deadliest sins often wore the mask of respectability. And in the Pine Grove subdivision, behind the closed doors of well-kept houses, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the carefully maintained facade of suburban perfection forever. The broken garage door that morning in October would later be seen as a cruel twist of fate. Emma, she had been struggling with the manual opening, her small body straining against the weight. When Robert Miller's voice broke the crisp autumn air, "Do you need help with that?" A simple question, laden with consequences that neither of them could foresee. Robert, in his moisture-wicking running clothes and his 20-year wedding ring, seemed every bit the secure and paternal figure as he examined the garage door mechanism. His hands, weathered yet skilled, quickly identified the problem. A broken cable that would be expensive to repair. Emma's face fell upon hearing the news. Another bill she couldn't pay. Robert, noticing her expression, he offered to fix it himself. "I've done it before," he said. "It just needs a few parts from Home Depot." That Saturday morning repair extended into an afternoon conversation. Emma made coffee. Her mother had taught her that it was the right thing to do when someone helped you. They sat on her porch. With steam rising from their mugs, Robert explained how to maintain the garage door, when to oil the chains, and which sounds indicated problems. Emma listened attentively, taking notes on her phone, grateful for the guidance in this world of home maintenance that David used to handle. Their conversations turned into a morning ritual. Robert adjusted his running schedule to coincide with the time Emma left for work. "Just checking if that door is still behaving," he would say. But both knew that the garage door had ceased to be the reason for their talks a long time ago. Emma began to pay more attention to her appearance on those mornings, changing her simple accountant ponytail for soft curls and her pharmacy lipstick for something with more color. Then came the lawn. "David always wanted to plant flowers here," Emma mentioned one morning, pointing out the bare spots under her windows. Robert's offer to help plan a garden seemed unexpected enough. They spent a Sunday afternoon designing flower beds. His knowledge of perennials and soil types impressive. If his hands lingered too long while showing her how to test soil quality, if her eyes held his gaze a moment too long while discussing shade plants, neither of them imagined. As the fall progressed, their interactions became more frequent, more intense. The conversations over coffee moved from home maintenance to personal confidences. Emma shared her struggles with the insurance company, the endless paperwork of death. Robert spoke about his own financial pressures, the college tuition for 2 children, a refinanced mortgage, a wife who spent to fill her emotional void. "Patricia doesn't understand budgets," he would say that, shaking his head. "Not like you." The neighborhood noticed, of course. Pine Grove thrived on observation and speculation. Helen Martinez, the self-proclaimed neighborhood watch coordinator, noticed Robert's car in Emma's driveway at odd hours, helping with home repairs. Emma explained, the words becoming a mantra. But Ellen noticed how Robert's hand rested on the small of Emma's back while examining the gutters, how Emma's laughter at his jokes echoed through the perfectly manicured gardens. At the First Baptist Church, whispers began during Sunday coffee hour. Thomas, the church secretary for 20 years, saw how Emma and Robert seemed to gravitate toward each other after services. Their conversations, supposedly about church maintenance committees, became a noticeable intensity. "She is young enough to be his daughter," murmured the women's prayer group. But their tone suggested they suspected something very different. Patricia Miller noticed it too, although she buried her concerns beneath antidepressants and online shopping. She observed how Robert lingered over his morning coffee. She watched him check his phone more often. When the name Emma was mentioned, his responses became too casual, too rehearsed. Just being a good neighbor, he would say, her eyes not meeting hers. At Carson and Associates, Emma's co-workers noticed changes in her behavior. The once downcast widow was transforming. She hummed while making copies, looked in the mirror more often. She smiled at her phone when messages came in. Carol Wilson, in the cubicle next to her, noticed Emma's extended lunch breaks and how she returned with her lipstick slightly smeared and a blush on her cheeks. Physical boundaries started to blur in subtle ways. Robert's demonstrations on home repairs required more contact. His hands covering Emma's to show the proper grip on the tools. His chest pressing against her back while demonstrating trimming techniques. Emma found reasons to touch him too. Brushing off non-existent lint from his shoulder, letting her fingers brush against his as they passed tools. Their conversations became more personal, more dangerous. Late one night, after checking a leaky faucet, Robert confessed that his marriage had been emotionally dead for years. Emma, with a glass of wine in hand, she admitted how lonely her bed felt, how the silence in her house was deafening. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. The dependence grew like ivy on a wall, subtle, sneaky, eventually impossible to remove without damaging the structure. Emma started messaging Robert about every creak in the house, every flickering light bulb. Robert found excuses to stop by her house at night, checking if his car was there, if the lights were on. They created a world of secret signals. Porsche lights indicating it was safe to talk, closed curtains indicating a need for privacy, car positions signaling availability. By Thanksgiving, warning signs were flashing red. Emma declined her parents' invitation for the holiday, claiming she had work. Robert started a fight with Patricia about spending the day with her sister. Both ended up alone, sharing furtive messages about their separate meals, messages laden with an undercurrent of longing that would soon explode into something neither could control. The neighborhood watched, waited, and whispered. In the Pine Grove subdivision, where appearances were everything and reputation meant survival, everyone could feel the storm approaching, but no one, not even he with his neighborhood watch records, neither Marie with her church gossip, nor even Patricia with her growing fear, could foresee how violently this storm would erupt. The first kiss happened in Emma's garage, of all places. December had brought an early snowfall to Pine Grove, and Robert had gone to help her prepare the pipes for winter. At least that's what they told themselves. The garage door that had started it all closed with a hum behind them, and in the dim light, surrounded by David's old tools and half-finished projects, something finally broke. The kiss tasted like coffee and guilt. Emma's hands clung to Robert's coat, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they pulled apart, breathing heavily in the cold garage air, both knew there was no turning back. The line had been crossed and, as with all forbidden things, it left them wanting more. The garage became their sanctuary. Every stolen moment under the guise of home repairs led to passionate encounters. Robert would press Emma against David's old workbench, his fingers intertwining in the cold garage air, her guilty pleasure intensified by the ghosts of their past commitments. The soft moans of Emma mingled with the whistling of the winter wind that seeped through the cracks of the garage door. Once, their forbidden love symphony. Their first actual meeting outside the garage took place at the Sunset Motel, 20 miles out of town. Robert booked the room with cash. They arrived separately, Emma claiming a dentist appointment, Robert a meeting with a supplier. The motel became their refuge, a place where they could shed their Pine Grove personas and simply be lovers. Amid passionate encounters, emotional confessions flowed like wine. Emma revealed her deepest fears, dying without power. Forever the young widow. Robert spoke of his crumbling marriage, of feeling trapped in a life that had become a prison of expectations. Their physical attraction burned stronger with each secret shared. With each moment of vulnerability, they developed an intricate communication system. Burner phones bought in different cities became their lifelines. Code words infiltrated their daily conversations. Budget review meant a meeting at the moment. In the hotel, house inspection indicated an urgent need to talk. Maintenance review signaled that Patricia couldn't talk. They mastered the art of secret messages hidden in plain sight. Their meeting points expanded beyond the rundown motel. Empty parking lots behind deserted stores. Remote trails where they could walk hand in hand. Cafes in neighboring towns where no one knew their names. Each place carefully chosen. Every meeting meticulously planned. The relationship intensified with a terrifying speed. Their phones buzzed constantly with encrypted messages, thinking, "I need you now. I can't sleep without hearing your voice. I miss your touch. When can I see you again?" Robert's possessiveness grew like a shadow. He started questioning Emma about her male co-workers, demanding to know her whereabouts when they weren't together. He offered to help with her mortgage payments, slipping money into her purse after their meetings. Emma, initially reluctant, found herself accepting his financial support, another chain binding them. Their emotional dependency deepened into obsession. Emma measured her days by their meetings, her nights by their messages. She began canceling plans with friends and avoiding family gatherings. Her world was reduced to just Robert. He became everything to her, lover, protector. The risks they took became bolder, more reckless. They met for lunch in restaurants just outside the city. Their hands touching under the table, Emma would visit Robert's office after hours, leaving traces of her perfume on his chair. They became careless with their fingerprints, making too many calls, sending too many messages, too many location patterns that could be tracked. Their public appearances became more frequent, more dangerous. They arrived separately at church events, but gravitated towards each other like magnets. Their eyes would meet in crowded rooms, holding the gaze for too long. They found excuses to work together on church committees, their meetings suspiciously long. The financial entanglement added another layer to their complicated relationship. Robert began paying more of Emma's bills, drawing him further away from her. Claiming he couldn't bear to see her struggle, he added her as an authorized user on a secret credit card, giving her a glimpse of the lifestyle he wanted to provide. Emma, drowning in mortgage payments and debts, accepted his help, though she shouldn't have. The obsession manifested in increasingly obvious patterns. Robert's car was seen in Emma's neighborhood at odd hours. Emma showed up at Robert's workplace with flimsy excuses about tax documents. They took suspiciously similar lunch breaks, returning with slightly rumpled clothes and flushed faces. Their digital trail became more careless. Despite using disposable phones, they couldn't resist constant communication. Hundreds of messages daily, late-night calls lasting hours. Location-sharing apps that tracked their movements started taking photos together. Dangerous proof of their affair was stored in encrypted apps. As spring approached, their passion turned darker. Robert's jealousy would flare at the slightest provocation. He installed a security camera at Emma's house and, saying it was for her protection, but actually to monitor her visitors. Emma became equally possessive, driving by his house at night, checking if his car was there. Growing paranoid about his time with Patricia, they began talking about a future together, creating impossible fantasies. Robert spoke of leaving Patricia, starting anew with Emma in another city. Emma dreamed of being more than the young widow, of having a real family once again. But these dreams had a desperate edge, a madness born from knowing they could never become reality. The risk escalated to nearly suicidal levels. They began meeting in their car in the church parking lot after evening services. Emma would visit Robert's house when Patricia was supposedly asleep. Robert started leaving obvious gifts in Emma's car, jewelry she didn't like, expensive, designer clothes, items that couldn't be justified. Their attraction had turned into a runaway train, feeding on the drama. Fueled equally by passion and self-destruction, neither could see that they were playing with fire in a town made of tinder, that their carefully built world of secrets was about to explode in flames that would consume them both. And in Pine Grove, In this grove, where appearances were everything and gossip traveled at the speed of light, the pressure was building. Their neighbors watched, their families suspected, and their desperate decisions were leading them down a path that would end in tragedy, like in a Greek tragedy where the audience can see the disaster coming, but the actors couldn't. Robert and Emma rushed towards their fate, blind to everything except their own consuming passion. At the beginning of the summer, their affair had evolved into something darker, more dangerous. The disposable phones buzzed constantly, their screens lighting up with an endless stream of messages. Where are you? Who are you with? Send me a photo to prove you're at work. I'm watching your house, I can't breathe without you. Answer me now. 100 messages became 200. Then 300 exchanges daily. Robert had installed a tracking app on Emma's phone during one of their encounters, disguising it as a security measure. It's for your protection, he whispered. But his eyes had a possessive gleam that should have warned her. Emma, already too caught up in their toxic dance, she accepted. She even found comfort in the blue dot that showed where Robert was at all times, not realizing it was just another chain in their mutual imprisonment. Their physical encounters had become almost violent in intensity. The rundown Sunset Motel was now their daily refuge. The receptionist no longer bothered to ask for identification upon checking them in under false names. The once pristine room 114 bore witness to their escalating passion: broken lamps, torn curtains, cracked mirrors. They left marks on each other that became difficult to hide, scratches on Robert's back, bruises on Emma's wrists, bite marks peeking above collars. Robert started taking ridiculous risks. He would pull Emma into supply closets during church events, his hands rough with need, deaf to her whispered protests about someone hearing them. They had frantic encounters in their car in broad daylight. Fogged up windows and the chassis rocking, drawing curious glances from passers-by. This time, he took her over his office desk during the lunch hour, scattering papers and family photos in their urgent union. The pressure from the outside world grew like a storm. Patricia, emerging from her depressive fog, started asking questions about the late nights and unexplained expenses. She found hotel receipts that Robert had forgotten to destroy. Credit card statements showing purchases in women's boutiques. Her silent tears at dinner were met with Robert's cold indifference. Emma's parents noticed changes in their daughter. Her Sunday visits, once regular, became sporadic. Her phone calls short and distracted. Her mother noticed expensive jewelry that an entry-level accountant couldn't afford. But Emma's explanations about bonuses and savings sounded hollow. You aren't involved with someone, are you? One day her mother asked her directly. Emma's overly quick denial and nervous laughter said it all. At Carson and Associates, Emma's work began to suffer. She missed deadlines, made careless mistakes, and spent hours staring at her phone instead of spreadsheets. Her supervisor called her in for a warning meeting, but Emma hardly registered the concern in his voice, her mind already on her next meeting with Robert. The whispers in the community grew louder. The church ladies no longer even lowered their voices when discussing the inappropriate friendship between the deacon and the young widow. Inside her bubble of obsession, the church lady felt desperate. The church lady felt desperate. Guilt and dependency were waging a war. Emma would wake up in the middle of the night, David's wedding ring still on her nightstand, and she sobbed until dawn. She began to see David's ghost in every corner of the house, his disappointment following her at every meeting with Robert. The guilt consumed her like acid. But the thought of ending things with Robert caused her panic attacks that left her breathless. Robert's possessiveness reached new levels. He installed more security cameras around Emma's house, monitoring every visitor. He would show up unannounced at her workplace, staring harshly at the male co-workers who approached her desk. His messages became more controlling, demanding to know Emma's every move, every interaction. He began to dictate what she wore, who she talked to, how she spent her time away from him. Their mutual dependence had turned into a monster devouring their sanity. Emma couldn't sleep without hearing Robert's voice. She couldn't eat unless he approved her choices. She couldn't make the simplest decision without his input. Robert's entire world had shrunk to Emma. His work suffered, his relationship with his children deteriorated, and his facade of respectability cracked under the pressure of his obsession. The financial entanglement reached a critical point. Robert had taken control of Emma's finances, paying her mortgage, her car payments, her credit cards. Every dollar exchanged between them was another link in their chains, another shackle in their hands, another reason why they couldn't break free. Emma's salary remained untouched in her bank account, every expense covered by Robert's increasingly reckless spending. The tension began to show in their physical appearance. Emma lost weight rapidly, her clothes hanging loose on her body, the permanent dark circles under her eyes. Robert aged years in months. His once impeccable appearance turned shabby. His hands trembled unless they were touching Emma. Their encounters took on a desperate edge. They fought violently, smiling. They talked about his controlling behavior, about Emma's supposed flirting with others, only to fall into passionate reconciliations that left hotel rooms in shambles. The staff at the Sunset Motel started asking for damage deposits upon check-in, tired of replacing broken furniture and stained carpets. Public confrontations became more frequent. During a church picnic, Robert grabbed Emma's arm with enough force to leave a bruise when she laughed at a joke told by the youth pastor. During a community fundraiser, Emma threw a drink in his face after seeing him talk to a colleague. Each incident added to the growing scandal. But they were too far gone to care. Their mental decline was apparent to anyone looking closely. Robert stopped attending family therapy sessions with Patricia, missed his son's university graduation, and neglected basic responsibilities at work. Emma began missing bill payments despite Robert's financial support. She would feel it, embrace him, and promise that things would change, but within a few hours, the cycle would start again. Desperate messages, heated accusations, passionate reconciliations. They were two people drowning, day after day. Drowning each other, their love turned into poison, their passion into destruction, and in Pine Grove, where secrets never stayed buried for long. The pressure kept building. Something had to break, and it did. On a hot July night, when Patricia Miller finally decided to follow her husband and discovered exactly where he was spending his lunch hours. The confrontation that followed would trigger a chain of events that would end in tragedy, changing the quiet suburb of Pine Grove forever. July 15th dawned hot and humid, that kind of summer day where the air feels like a weight on your chest. No one in Pine Grove could have known that by midnight, that weight would become suffocating and that by dawn, their peaceful community would change forever. The morning began with a message that lit up Emma's phone at 6:17 in the morning. "I saw him leave your house, don't lie to me." Who was it? The him in question was Mike, Emma's brother, who had stopped by early to drop off mail that had been mistakenly delivered to their parents' house. But remember that Robert, watching through the security cameras he had installed, only saw a male figure at Emma's door. His imagination, poisoned by months of obsession, filled in the gaps with the worst possible scenario. Emma's attempts to explain were met with a barrage of increasingly hostile messages. "You are mine. Do you think you can deceive me? I will destroy it. I will destroy everything." The confrontation erupted in the parking lot of Carson and Associates at 9:45 in the morning, heading into the afternoon. Robert, disheveled and with wild eyes, showed up unannounced at Emma's workplace. Witnesses would later describe how he grabbed her arm as she was getting out of her car, his voice echoing in the parking lot as he demanded answers about her visitor. "You're hurting me." Emma's shout caught the attention of her co-workers, Carol Wilson, from accounting. She would later tell the police how Emma's sleeve was pulled up, revealing bruises shaped like fingers that were not from that morning's grasp. Robert let her go only when several male colleagues approached. But his final words hung in the air, "This isn't over." Throughout the day, Emma's phone buzzed incessantly. Robert's messages swung between anger and pleading. 10:15 in the morning, "You're destroying us." 11:30 in the morning, "You're destroying us. You, please, I'm sorry." 12:45 in the afternoon, "Respond to me or I swear to God." 2:20 in the afternoon, "I'm going to die without you." By the afternoon, Emma had reached her breaking point. During her lunch hour, she drove to the First National Bank and withdrew all the money from her personal account, 3,427 pesos. She called her cousin in Ohio, her voice trembling, asking if she could stay with her for a while. She started packing a suitcase that she hid under a blanket in the trunk of her car. Theft. Robert, consumed by his obsession, spent the day drinking in his office. His secretary would later report that he canceled all meetings, with the scent of whiskey seeping under the closed door. Between drinks, he made calls to his lawyer about changing his will. To a private investigator he had hired to watch Emma, to a gun shop in a nearby town. At 6:30 in the evening, Emma sent what she thought would be her last message to Robert. "It's over. Please, don't forget. Don't contact me anymore." She turned off her phone, unaware that Robert had already left his office, his Mercedes swaying slightly as he drove towards Pine Grove. The night unfolded like a Greek tragedy. Each moment brought them closer to the inevitable. Security cameras from the gazebo on Main Street captured Robert buying more whiskey at 7:45 in the evening, with his credit card receipt showing it was his second bottle of the day. The cashier remembered him muttering about ungrateful sluts as he staggered out. Emma's neighbor, Dorothy Chabot, reported seeing Emma hurriedly entering her house at 8:15 in the evening, repeatedly looking over her shoulder. Through her kitchen window, Dorothy observed Emma making frantic phone calls, pacing back and forth with a packed suitcase visible in the background. The last call between them began at 11:43 at night. Phone records would show that it lasted 22 minutes. Only Emma and Robert would know what was said. Neighbors reported hearing the screech of Robert's car tires as it stopped in front of Emma's house at 1:15 in the morning. The last text message sent from Emma's phone, addressed to her mother, was never completed. More details. "Mom, if something happens to me, Robert is." What happened next would be pieced together from neighbor reports, physical evidence, and the eventual investigation of the crime scene. Ellen Martinez heard glass breaking at 1:20 in the morning. Richard Cooper's security camera captured the sound of screams at 1:23 in the morning. Dorothy Chen saw lights turning on and off, shadows moving violently behind Emma's curtains. The call to 911 came at 2:27 in the morning. But by then, it was too late. The carefully maintained facade of suburban perfection in Pine Grove had cracked, revealing the darkness that had been growing beneath its surface all along. The next morning's sun would rise over a community changed forever, forcing its residents to question how well they really knew their neighbors, their friends, their spouses. But in those final hours of darkness, as the police sirens pierced the summer night, two lives reached their tragic end in a tale as old as time, where love turned into obsession and obsession into death. Matthews, Emma's mother, would later find a diary on her daughter's nightstand. The last entry, dated July 15th, read, "I never wanted any of this to happen. I just didn't want to be alone anymore." The sound of wood splintering echoed in Pine Grove at 1:15 in the morning when Robert Miller's shoulder slammed against Emma's front door. The lock, recently installed out of fear of this very moment, gave way on the third impact. Later, forensic experts would find fragments of the doorframe embedded in Robert's leather jacket, a physical evidence of the violence of his entry. "Do you think you can leave me?" His voice, distorted by whiskey and anger, filled the dark house. Emma, who had been hurriedly packing on the upper floor, froze upon hearing her phone. Gripped with trembling fingers, it showed a half-written text message to 911 that would never be sent. The security cameras that Robert had installed to monitor Emma now captured his own descent into madness. The recordings, later recovered by the police, showed him moving through the house, overturning furniture, his movements erratic and threatening. "Emma, come down here now, Dorothy." Dorothy Chen, watching from her kitchen window while holding on the line, with 911, later described how Emma appeared at the top of the stairs holding a baseball bat, one of David's belongings. "She looked terrified," Dorothy testified, "but also tense." "Robert, please leave." Emma's voice trembled, but it carried strength. "I've called the police." The lie enraged him even more. Robert stormed up the stairs two at a time, the whiskey bottle in his hand swinging wildly. Emma swung the bat, hitting him on the shoulder. The impact made him stagger, but didn't stop his advance. The bottle crashed against the wall, scattering glass and alcohol over the family photos from happier times. The struggle moved through the house like a destructive dance. Each room witnessed the violence, with overturned furniture in the living room and broken mirrors in the hallway. Photographs of David destroyed by Robert's jealousy. Emma struggled desperately, leaving scratch marks on Robert's face that would later be photographed as evidence. The kitchen became the scene of their final confrontation. Emma managed to break free and ran towards the back door. But Robert grabbed her by the hair. The knife block fell as Emma leaned against the counter, scattering blades across the floor. In the struggle, Robert's wedding ring, which he never took off, never removed despite months of infidelity, it left a deep cut on Emma's cheek. Ellen Martinez, the ever-watchful neighborhood watch coordinator, described hearing Emma scream at 1:23 in the morning. "It was not a scream of fear," she testified later. "It was pure terror, pure rage." The sound was followed by breaking glass, Robert throwing Emma against the china cabinet that had been a wedding gift from her grandmother. The fatal moment, reconstructed by forensic experts, occurred around 1:25 in the morning, when Emma, bleeding from cuts caused by the broken glass, had picked up a kitchen knife from the floor. Robert, seeing the blade, laughed maniacally. "You wouldn't dare," he taunted her. "You are nothing without me." Emma's first strike hit him on the shoulder, a defensive wound, but as Robert lunged at her, the knife found its mark. It sank deeply into his chest. Robert's expression of rage turned to surprise as he staggered back, knocking over the kitchen table. The trail of blood showed how he stumbled toward the living room, leaving crimson traces on the walls, before collapsing near the front door. The calls to 911 began coming in at 1:27 in the morning. Dorothy Chen, still watching. "There's been a fight. I think someone is hurt." Ellen Martinez, "I just heard screams and glass breaking at Emma Davis's house." Richard Cooper, "There's blood on my security camera." "Someone needs to come now." The first responders arrived at 1:35 in the morning to find Emma sitting on her front porch and at the front door of Emma Davis's house, the bloody knife still in her hand, her white nightgown stained crimson. "He wouldn't stop," she repeated, with an unsettling calm. "He just wouldn't stop." Inside, the house told the story of the final struggle. The blood spatter analysis would later confirm Emma's account of self-defense. The overturned furniture, the broken glass and the multiple points of impact evidenced a prolonged struggle. Robert's body lay face up near the door, his lifeless eyes still reflecting the rage that led him to his death. The crime scene investigators worked through the night photographing evidence, collecting samples, documenting. They found Robert's phone shattered on the kitchen floor, its screen still showing his last unsent message. Emma's phone, retrieved from the upstairs, contained more than 300 messages from Robert just that day, ranging from declarations of love to threats of death. The security cameras he had installed provided investigators with a complete recording of the fatal confrontation, although Emma's lawyers would later use these same recordings to build her self-defense case. At dawn, Piney Grove had turned into a media circus. News vans filled the streets as neighbors came out to find their quiet community at the center of a tragic story of love, obsession, and violence. Obsession and death. Police tape fluttered in the morning breeze as crime scene technicians continued their work, each piece of evidence telling part of the story of how an affair ended. A middle-aged deacon's affair with a young widow ended in bloodshed. Patricia Miller, called to identify her husband's body, collapsed upon arrival, her cries of anguish mixed with words of denial. No, Robert. Robert, not my Robert. Their children, hastily returning from university, found. The respected name of their family suddenly became synonymous with scandal and tragedy. Emma was taken into custody at 6:15 in the morning. Her vacant expression and blood-stained appearance made the veteran officers look away. As they led her to the police car, she passed by David's portrait, still hanging crooked on the wall. Some witnesses swore they saw her whisper, "I'm sorry," to the picture of her first husband. Although this detail never appeared in the official reports, Pine Grove would never be the same again. The carefully maintained facade of suburban perfection had shattered, forcing residents to confront the dark undercurrents that had flowed beneath their well-kept lawns and daily church gatherings. The murder would become a cautionary tale whispered at neighborhood meetings, a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are not in dark streets, but behind the closed doors of the homes we believe we know. The knife block in the kitchen, with its contents scattered, became the most dangerous place in the world. It spoke of desperation, rather than premeditation. Digital forensics became crucial for the case. Robert's phone contained more than 2,000 messages sent to Emma just in the past week. "You're mine. I'd rather die than let you go. If I can't have you, no one can. No one will." The security cameras he had installed, intended to monitor Emma, no longer work. They documented instead his own descent into madness. The recordings showed him prowling around the house at night, spying through the windows, tracking her movements. His obsession with her life. His obsession, digitally preserved, would become the prosecution's nightmare and the defense's greatest asset. The crime scene technicians worked methodically in the house, documenting their actions. They found Emma's suitcase packed upstairs and plane tickets to Ohio dated for the following morning, suggesting a plan to escape. Robert's whiskey bottle, shattered during the struggle, left glass shards embedded in both of their skins, evidence of the violence of their last encounter. The timeline emerged through statements from neighbors and electronic records. 1:15 in the morning. Forced entry by Robert. 23 minutes past 1 in the morning. First sounds of struggle. 25 minutes past 1 in the morning. Estimated time of the fatal confrontation. **1. 27 a.m. Multiple calls to 911. 3:35 in the morning. Arrival of the first responders. The arrest photo of Emma showed her still in her blood-stained nightgown, her face bearing the marks of Robert's final rage. She was charged with second-degree murder, but her lawyer, Katarina, and Chen immediately began building a self-defense case. The preliminary hearing filled the county courthouse. Patricia Miller sat rigidly in the front row, flanked by her children like guards. Emma's parents huddled on the opposite side. The vacant look on her daughter's face was a testament to her psychological state. Expert testimony was crucial. Dr. James Harrison, a forensic psychologist, analyzed the text messages and security recordings. What we see here is a classic pattern of obsessive control that escalates into behavior, potentially lethal. Mr. Miller's actions clearly show signs of a man who would rather destroy what he loves than lose control over it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence piled up daily. 7,234 text messages in 6 months. 142 hours of security recordings. 23 witness statements. 89 photos of Emma's previous injuries. Robert's search history showing searches about weapons. The defense painted the portrait of a young widow trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. The prosecution argued premeditated murder, but struggled against the weight of the evidence showing Robert's obsessive behavior. The verdict came on a rainy Tuesday. Not guilty by reason of self-defense. Emma collapsed onto the defense table. As Patricia Miller's cry of denial echoed in the courtroom, Pine Grove fractured in the process. the congregation of the First Baptist Church was divided. Some supported Patricia Miller, while others acknowledged the darkness that had dwelled among them. The Miller children dropped out of college, unable to face their peers. Emma's parents put their house up for sale. Understanding that their daughter could never return to Pine Grove, the media circus brought unwanted attention. National news networks descended, turning tragedy into primetime entertainment. Fatal attraction in the suburbs. Talk shows debated the morality of May-December romances. The True Crime Podcast dissected every detail. Local organizations responded thoroughly. By taking action, the Women's Shelter expanded its services to include support for abusive relationships with age differences. The church established counseling services for families affected by infidelity. The Neighborhood Watch implemented new training to recognize signs of domestic violence. Pine Grove itself underwent subtle changes. Security systems appeared in more homes. Neighborhood Watch expanded. Community meetings addressed topics previously considered taboo. Health. The facade of perfect suburban life had cracked, revealing the human struggles beneath. Pine Grove continued to heal. The Davis house remained vacant, a silent reminder of the tragedy. Patricia Miller had moved away, unable to face the daily reminders of her husband's double life. Emma, reportedly from Seattle, was in therapy, trying to rebuild her life. The case led to legal reforms. The state legislature passed the Emma Law, which requires faster response times to domestic violence calls in suburban areas. The local police department developed new protocols to handle harassment reports. Support groups formed organically. Women who had experienced similar relationships started gathering at the community center. The church organized healing circles for families affected by infidelity. The high school added educational programs about healthy relationships. The community learned painful lessons about appearance versus reality, about the darkness one can hide behind respectable facades, about the importance of reaching out to those in need. Pine Grove would never return to its innocent past, but perhaps it had grown into a more honest and compassionate place. As Ellen Martinez, the Neighborhood Watch coordinator who had witnessed the tragedy, reflected in her journal today. In the past, we thought we were protecting our community from external threats. We never imagined that the real danger could come from our own carefully maintained streets, behind our own closed doors.